This morning, President Trump in Texas doubling down as pro-police and not addressing any of the protesters' demands. Will anything meaningful come from what all we witnessed? Republicans and Democrats in D.C., though, have their own ideas. One Texas congressman tells us where both sides are finding common ground on police reform. Coronavirus cases on the rise in Texas. Could this state see rolling shutdowns? 2 months till the start of school, and parents have no idea what class will look like this fall. The superintendent from Plano tells us how she is already preparing. And what role do police unions play in protecting bad cops? More importantly, what role do they have in reform? Questions we will ask the president of the Austin Police Association.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good morning. Those guests are standing by, but let's get our program started with the top political headlines across our state. For the first time since the coronavirus lockdowns, President Trump started in-person campaigning again, and he came to Texas first. The president attended a fundraiser in Dallas last Thursday and added $10 million to his re-election campaign. Just before that, though, at a roundtable discussion, Trump doubled down, saying he supports police, but he didn't offer a single idea to address protesters' demands. There are bipartisan calls for the Williamson County Sheriff to resign. A black man died in the custody of one of his deputies. Minutes earlier, that man seen there did not dim his headlights. Police chased him, and despite Javier Ambler, his name, saying he could not breathe and that he had congestive heart failure, deputies still wrestled him to the ground, where he lost consciousness and later died. And in Fort Worth, another sign of just how fast things are moving right now. Tarrant County commissioners voted 4-0 to remove a Confederate marker on the courthouse grounds. This is one that the Daughters of the Confederacy dedicated back in 1953. This morning, people are rightfully asking what concrete change will come out of the protests we witnessed. House Democrats laid out their proposals last week. Senate Republicans discussed their own. Where will they find common ground, though? Our first guest this morning is Congressman Marc Veasey. He is a Democrat who represents the 33rd District, stretching from Fort Worth all the way over to Dallas. Congressman, good morning to you.
Morning, Jason.
A few days ago here in Dallas, we heard at length from the president. This morning, we want to hear from you. The president doubled down on being pro-police and never discussed racism at all. So I'm curious, what are the chances now for bipartisan police reform?
I think that we have a great opportunity for bipartisan police reform. We're going to pass a bill in the House. The Senate has indicated that they would like to take up a bill. Hopefully, their bill has some substance to it, some meat to it. But so I think that there's a great opportunity. But obviously, the final piece of the puzzle is the President of the United States. It's discouraging when you think about the fact that he goes and does a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Juneteenth of all dates, and of course, for Tulsa, it was considered probably the worst race riot ever in American history. And for him to choose that town on that date was very insensitive. The way he's talked about the Confederate monuments and the statues and the military bases, that's been very insensitive.
Well, you mentioned, Congressman, you mentioned obviously he's the wild card in this. You think it's highly likely that we might get bipartisan police reform. Let's lay out what Democrats want. You want to make it easier to sue police for bad behavior, create a national registry of bad police officers so they can't move around like they are right now, make lynching a federal crime, stop giving surplus military equipment to local police.
No chokeholds.
No chokeholds. Which of these, though, might have the best chance of making it to the president's desk and getting him to sign it?
The Republicans haven't really been that detailed about what they will and won't accept. I think that Kevin McCarthy on the House side, that he's indicated that there may be some parts of the Democratic bill that he would accept. But at the end of the day, again, we need for the president to be able to do his part in the executive branch. I think that you're going to see some bipartisanship. I'm encouraged, at least by what I've heard so far, that we're going to see some bipartisanship on the House side, on the legislative side. But as far as the executive branch is concerned, we need for the president to step up and stop playing Twitter and stop trying to play to his base and bring the country together. I think that it's sad. You look at what presidents have done when the country has been at a weak moment, and they've always tried to bring the country together, whether it was Lincoln during the Civil War, whether it was Roosevelt during World War II, and this president is doing everything he can to continue to divide us because he thinks that it's good for his electoral politics. And I think it's lousy for his electoral politics. I think he's going to continue to do bad in suburbs and putting a lot of
Congressman, let me ask
Congress at risk. And he needs to step up to the plate.
You mentioned your colleagues on the right side of the aisle. What proposals, and I know they are few and far between right now, but what proposals by Republicans do you like right now?
I haven't really seen any specific proposals from Republicans on police reform. They've indicated that some of the things that we've talked about, perhaps they would be able to support, but I haven't seen anything specific from them. I hope that in addition to joining marches or giving us lip service, that they actually do join us this time. I mean, if you think about the Republicans in the past, they've been very hesitant to address race and even say that race is an issue. And you've seen even members of Trump's cabinet say that there's no such thing as systemic racism in our country. And so the fact that we have members of the legislative branch that are Republicans that are saying, hey, we need to do something, maybe they can go to the White House, go to 1600 Pennsylvania, and talk some sense into Trump and get him to come the right way on this issue of race.
Hey, Congressman, we have 60 seconds left here. I want to ask you about the presidential campaign. You and I last saw each other in person back in Iowa when you were campaigning for Vice President Biden. President Trump is restarting his rallies in Tulsa. You mentioned it a moment ago. Doesn't that put pressure on Biden to do the same and get back out physically in front of people? You know,
I think that I want to see Biden be responsible. And if he thinks that as far as his health and if he wants to make sure that he's not exposing anyone else, then I can understand that. It's really tough to be in large groups right now because of coronavirus. And so if the vice president is doing what he thinks is putting the health and safety of Americans first, then I'm for that before I'm for a rally.
All right, Congressman Marc Veasey, thanks for the time.
Hey, thanks, Jason.
Now to the other major issue we all face. The coronavirus cases are rising in Texas, and so are hospitalizations. And that is the metric that the governor said he is using to guide him on reopening. So if hospitalizations are on the rise, does that mean we might face more shutdowns now? Ross Ramsey is the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin, as always. Good morning, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well. You know, cases are increasing. Is there any political appetite, though, for more shutdowns?
Well, I think they're just watching the gauges right now, and they're not to the point where they feel like they have to make a decision to back up on any of the restrictions that they've lifted so far. But they're watching carefully. After Memorial Day, things started to move up. They've moved up since. We've had a couple of things happen since then. More stores and things have opened, and we've had a bunch of protests where a bunch of people were out all close together, and we'll have to see how those show up in the numbers.
Yeah, in the next week or so. You know, you and I have talked a lot on this program about vote by mail and Democrats really trying to make that happen in the courts. But now the state party, Texas Democrats, have dropped their lawsuit over voting by mail, their state lawsuit at least. Why is that?
Right. Well, they dropped the state lawsuit after the Supreme Court tossed them out. There was a chance for them to go back to the court and say, hey, would you reconsider? But they decided to just cast their lot with the federal courts. This is now before the very conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and maybe one of several cases on the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
And that's what everyone wants to know, is whether the Supreme Court will take it up. Ross, thanks. Back to you in a moment. Coming up, 2 months now till the start of school, and parents have no idea what class is going to look like in the fall. Plano, though, is already preparing. We'll talk to the superintendent from there when we return. And what role do police unions play in protecting bad cops? More importantly, what role do they have in reform? Questions we will ask the president of the Austin Police Association. Policing in America is at a crossroads. It needs to be reimagined, but what does it look like? Defund police isn't the same as disbanding a department. On the latest episode of our Y'all-itics Political Podcast, 2 law enforcement instructors share what they are teaching cops today and how departments can root out bad cops with bias. It's an interesting conversation you can get quickly with your cell phone. Just aim the camera at this QR code on your screen. Pause this if you have to, and it will take you directly to the latest episode of Y'all-itics. In Austin, the city council there has decided it will not hire any more police officers right now. It's also banning chokeholds and strongholds, shooting at moving vehicles, and the use of tear gas at crowds that are expressing their First Amendment rights. This morning, we're asking what role police unions have in reform. In Austin is Ken Cassidy. He is the president of the Austin Police Association. Ken, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing well. You know, many people say police unions are the problems, that they protect bad cops. How do you respond to that?
You know, I would say it's not true. I would say that we make sure that officers are treated fairly and that they have due process. You know, you hear a lot of people complaining about the arbitration process where officers get their jobs back. Here in Austin, we have some fantastic attorneys. And probably since I've been president for the last 6 years, we lose about 80% of our cases. So as far as all these officers, bad officers getting their jobs back, you know, I've been through many dozens of arbitrations, and I've only won probably about 4 or 5 of them. So I think that's a misnomer. I think maybe the statistics are a little bit different in other cities, but here in Austin, we only win about 20% of our cases.
In other cities and other states, having lived up north, I know that the unions and the associations up there are certainly different than they are in Texas. But I want to ask you about the city council in Austin voting to reallocate police funds, hiring no new officers this year, and moving some money for police over to public health and safety resources. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very hasty reaction. You know, they want civilians doing commitments and dealing with the mentally ill here. I agree with that, but in state law here in Texas, only a doctor and a police officer can commit someone for an emergency detention. So they haven't thought that out. They've taken money away, or they want to take money away to do these grandiose things, which some of them I'm actually in support of, but they're not thinking about it. And as usual, city government, they're not planning, and they haven't thought about what they're doing.
Ken, there's a lot of talk about reimagining public safety in this state. What are some of the reforms that you like and that your members like?
You know, some of the reforms that I've heard that I think we can work on are a checkup from the neck up, where an officer goes about every 5 years to be reevaluated by one of our staff psychologists. That's one of the best ones, because you hear a lot of complaints saying these are rogue officers, they're out of control, they have mental issues, which I don't believe in. But if it makes people feel better, and I don't think the officers would mind, is the checkup from the neck up, and I think that's a good area to get started in.
Is that happening anywhere right now? The checkup from the neck up? It's an idea I haven't heard of.
It's not. Believe it or not, I'll give credit to our old chief. Chief Art Acevedo. It was an idea that he came up with years ago. As far as being forced to do it, I think you can do that. But as far as the results of it, and there's private HIPAA issues that you have to deal with. So it's a really good idea that I think we can work on. I'm just not sure how it would end up.
All right. Ken Cassidy from the Austin Police Association. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me.
School starts in 2 months, but coronavirus cases are rising in Texas, and no one really knows yet what class is going to look like. Like many districts, Plano ISD is already preparing. Sarah Bosner is the superintendent there and joins us to talk about the direction she is taking with so much still uncertain. Good morning to you, Sarah.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on here. We're less than 2 months away right now from the start of school. The big question all parents want to know, has your district, specifically Plano ISD, settled on a plan to restart classes?
Well, first of all, we understand how eager parents and staff and students, I'm sure, are preparing to think about what does reopening schools look like, and we certainly can empathize with that. And so we have been working hard to develop plans to try to figure out what that might look like for the fall. And we have developed some tentative models that we think would address reopening schools safely. And like everyone else, we're in a little bit of a holding pattern waiting for some additional guidance from the state before we can definitively say how school will start in the fall.
And that's kind of where we are. The TEA is going to make a decision and tell districts like Plano kind of how to move forward. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct.
I want to ask you, many classrooms and even buildings at schools and at campuses all across Texas aren't going to be able to accommodate social distancing. What are some options that you guys are considering at Plano ISD to make the most use of spacing?
Yeah, we've been in heavy planning modes around just that very question. Of course, if we can do certain ratios, we might be able to bring all kids back at certain grade levels. And we want to try to have as much face-to-face as we can safely have, but understanding that because of space and staffing, if the parameters are that you can't bring large enough groups of students back, then we have to look at alternate schedules where we wouldn't bring all the kids back every day. And so then you would want to bring, kids back as many times during the week as you could in a rotating fashion to try to make sure everybody gets some face-to-face time with teachers. And then some of their learning would happen from home and so remotely. So
when do
those are the models.
Yeah, and when do you think that you might have a decision on how to move forward and might hear from the TEA?
So we have reason to believe that perhaps by Tuesday, June 16th, we'll have an update from the commissioner at TEA, and that Commissioner Morath would give us some additional guidance on what the space requirements might be for returning, and also what the funding structures might look like for remote learning, should that be necessary.
All right, sounds good. Sarah, I appreciate your time. Good luck to you there at Plano ISD as we move forward with this. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. On Friday, President Trump resumes his large rallies, but the date and location of the very first one makes African Americans wonder. That's our first topic next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back. Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram is here. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, joins us each week. And Ross, will start with you as always. On Friday, President Trump is going to be in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It is his first big campaign rally since all the coronavirus closures. But African Americans are really questioning the timing of this, the date of it, and the location as well.
Well, Juneteenth is a big day. It's the day that Texas blacks found out about the Emancipation Proclamation. Tulsa is, of course, the site of one of the biggest race riots in American history. The symbolism here is unmistakable, and African Americans don't like it.
Symbolism is unmistakable, Bud.
Well, but in Oklahoma, they say that Oklahoma tried to get the Republican convention. They lost out to Jacksonville when the convention was moved. The Trump people gave them this instead. It's not clear that anybody really gave any thought to the date. But, since then, we see the Republican Party is rebranding itself once again as the Party of Lincoln. And I think the Party of Lincoln is the new message for the party.
So, Bernadine, when Bud just said that no one may have really given a close enough attention to the date, your eyes got big and you wanted to jump in there. Do you think this was subtle at all?
Oh, no. Last year, during Juneteenth, the White House posted on its website the mention of Juneteenth. So they knew exactly what this date means, as well as how it would play to their base, because this is what it appears to be, that the Trump campaign is again using a dog whistle to send a message and communicate to its base. Keep in mind that Trump garnered 65% of the vote in 2016. And he knows how to play racial politics, but you know what is so discouraging? That he uses this situation, Juneteenth and Tulsa, to send a signal to us to say that he somewhat has a contempt for Black Americans.
Do you really, Bernadine, do you really think there's a subtle message in the date and location?
Yes. If it isn't, he needs to get a new team, because this is America. And his team should know the significance behind Juneteenth, as well as holding a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma at this time.
Bud, you wanted to jump in?
Jason, we'll see what the message is and what he brings. The mayor of Tulsa said they weren't even asked. The deal was made with the arena without even telling the city. The mayor said he wasn't asked. He's not going.
Well, let's talk about the president coming to Dallas. He had a fundraiser here, Ross, a few nights ago. He raised $10 million. I'm curious whether you think that first campaign fundraiser might have turned out how he had hoped, considering he, just before that at the Roundtable, really had no concrete changes to propose to police reform.
You know, you always wonder when politicians are traveling right before an election, whether they're there for the policy news conference or whether they're there for the fundraiser. Maybe it's cynical. I think he was here for the fundraiser, and I think he raised a lot of money and had a successful day.
Bud?
Well, this was a church show. You have Scott Turner, you have African-American evangelicals. You know, this was really more about a faith roundtable in a church setting with church context than about any kind of police reform.
Bernadine, what do you think? Was this a photo op or what?
You took the words out of my mouth. It was strictly a photo op. He arrived in Dallas, had no intentions of coming up with any kind of policy. He disrespected the African-American elected officials who are into public safety, and it was strictly another photo op at a church.
And for the record, though, the White House did not invite the elected sheriff here, the elected DA, or the police department chief for Dallas. All three are African Americans, but the White House did say they did invite the mayor of Dallas. Guys, we are out of time. Thank you very much for your time.
Sometime we ought to see Trump go to a church on a Sunday. I'd like to see that.
We'll do that. Thanks for that, guys. We'll see y'all next Sunday on Inside Texas Politics. Take care.